The wind whipped through the streets of Helena, Montana, carrying flakes of snow sharp enough to slice exposed skin. Thermometers were almost laughably useless, with readings at -30 degrees C that barely hinted at the danger lingering in every shadow, every gust. It was the kind of cold that seemed to seep into the bones, a silence that pressed down on everything and everyone foolish enough to venture out. Ethan Cole pulled his threadbare coat tighter around himself, cursing under his breath. The gloves on his hands were useless, fingers numb within seconds of exposure. He had walked to the bus stop out of habit, though he no longer had anywhere to go, no purpose left to justify the effort. His breath fogged in front of him, dissolving quickly into the night. He sat hunched on the bench, knees drawn tight to his chest, wishing the world would let him disappear, wishing it would let him freeze in peace and wake somewhere that wasn't full of ghosts. The ghosts were everywhere: war, old friends lost in distant sands, promises broken and impossible to redeem. The memories had a way of rising at night and drowning him in them, even here in the quietest corner of the city. And then came the sound, a low, desperate whine carried faintly on the icy wind. At first, Ethan ignored it, assuming his mind was conjuring the noise from the cold and fatigue. But then it came again, louder, more insistent, cutting through the howl of the wind and echoing off the frost-covered buildings. He looked up. Across the snow, barely visible in the faint glow of a street lamp, stood a German shepherd. Its fur was matted and flecked with ice. Ribs protruded sharply under a coat that had once been thick and glossy. The dog's paws were bleeding, leaving tiny, dark streaks in the white snow. Its eyes, wide and luminous in the cold, locked onto Ethan. There was something human in them, something that said, "I've suffered, I've wandered, I have nowhere left to go." Ethan swallowed, throat dry, heart thudding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. "No," he whispered to himself. "Don't." But even as the words left his lips, the dog took a careful step forward, halting just at the edge of the snow-drifted sidewalk, still trembling. Ethan's boots crunched in the snow as he shifted uneasily. He had sworn off responsibilities long ago. He had sworn off connections. People, he had learned the hard way, left, betrayed, and vanished when he needed them most. Dogs were temporary comfort, a fleeting warmth in an otherwise frozen world. The German shepherd lowered its head slightly, tail tucked, muscles taut with exhaustion. Then came the slow, shivering step forward that shattered Ethan's resolve. He could not turn away, not entirely. Not while something so small, so fragile, so desperate depended on him. He breathed heavily, feeling the cold sting his lungs. He wanted to run, to pretend he had not seen the dog, to continue the lonely march of his days. But he didn't. Instead, he found himself standing, coat flapping in the wind like a battle flag. He took another step, and then another. The dog froze, head tilting, ears pricked. It was a soldier recognizing another soldier, though neither had seen the horrors the other had survived. The connection was immediate, visceral. Ethan crouched slightly, holding out a gloved hand, unsure whether he was inviting a friend or a foe. Rex, the dog's name, he later discovered, shivered violently, pressing his muzzle into the snow. He was so cold that each breath looked like smoke curling from the small gaps between his frozen fur. Ethan knelt fully now, extending his other hand cautiously. The German shepherd hesitated, the faint whine now rising into a soft, trembling cry. And then it happened, the decision that would change everything. Rex stepped forward, collapsing almost into Ethan's arms, trusting a man he had never met with a leap that seemed too fragile, too human to be believed. Ethan caught him instinctively, pressing his arms under the dog's ribs, feeling the tiny tremors that ran like electricity through his own body. He barely noticed the sharp wind stinging his face, barely noticed his boots freezing to the bench as he held the shivering animal close. The city seemed to fade around him, the snow, the ice, the bitter loneliness. For a moment, there was only Rex and the warmth of a life clinging to the edges of despair. Ethan's mind began to wander, memories surfacing unbidden. He remembered Kabul, the nights when he and his squad had huddled in foxholes, praying to survive another storm of bullets. He remembered the look in the eyes of a fallen comrade, the same look of helpless pleading he now saw reflected in Rex's gaze. He remembered promises he could not keep, lives he could not save. A sob rose in his throat, but he swallowed it. He had survived wars, survived betrayal, survived himself. Yet here, in the cold Montana night, it was a dog, a creature so often underestimated, that was breaking through the icy walls around his heart. Ethan tugged the dog closer, feeling a sharp pang in his chest as he realized the weight of the decision ahead. To take Rex meant responsibility, care, vigilance. It meant waking in the night to check the dog's paws, to feed him, to fight for him when the world had long since stopped fighting for Ethan. He looked into the dog's eyes again, snowflakes melting against his fur, and something within him shifted. This was not about saving a dog. This was about saving a piece of himself, a fragment he had buried beneath grief, regret, and numbness. Rex whimpered softly, pressing his cold nose into Ethan's neck. The small gesture broke through layers of fear and hesitation. In that moment, the veteran realized that life still demanded choices, still demanded courage, still demanded the willingness to care when it hurt. Ethan scooped Rex up into his arms, each step through the snow a battle of will. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, the wind clawed at his face, but he did not let go. The bus stop receded behind them, replaced by the blurred shapes of empty streets and shuttered windows. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he could not leave the dog in the snow, not tonight, not ever. Finally, he reached the edge of town where his cabin stood, small, battered, barely heated, but it was all he had left. He kicked snow off the porch and pushed open the door, warm air fighting the cold like a weak, flickering shield. He laid Rex down gently, wrapping him in a tattered army blanket that smelled faintly of home, of old battles, of memories he had almost lost. Rex shivered violently at first, then slowly began to calm, curling into himself like a living, breathing snowball. Ethan knelt beside him, tracing the lines of his face with trembling fingers, thinking of the lives he had saved, the lives he had lost, and the life now quietly resting in front of him. Outside, the wind howled as if mocking him. Inside, a fragile warmth began to grow. The night was far from over, the cold far from gone, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of something dangerous, something vital, hope. He sat there holding the dog close, eyes fixed on the darkened window where snow swirled like tiny spirits dancing in the night. He whispered softly, almost to himself. "Not tonight, not anymore. I won't let you go, not like the others, not like them." Rex's paw brushed his hand, weak but insistent, as though answering the unspoken vow. Ethan knew, deep in his chest, that the next hours would test them both, his courage, his patience, his humanity. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. And neither did Rex. Outside, the cold remained absolute. But inside, a veteran and a German shepherd had begun a new kind of battle, the fight to survive together. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the ice, the world waited. And it would not be the same. The fire sputtered in the old wood stove, casting uneven shadows across Ethan's cabin. The warmth was fragile, flickering, almost unreal against the -30°C storm raging outside. Each gust rattled the windows, making the tiny structure feel like it might collapse under the weight of the wind. But inside, for the first time in years, there was life, a fragile pulse that hadn't existed in his quiet, self-imposed exile. Rex lay curled on the blanket, eyes half closed, the rise and fall of his chest slow but steady. Every once in a while, he would shiver violently, and Ethan's hands would instinctively move to rub warmth into his cold, stiff paws. He had no idea how long the dog had been outside, alone, or how much suffering he had endured. Ethan's own body was numb, ache-filled from the trek through the snow, and yet he felt alive in a way that frightened him. Alive but exposed. Every beat of his heart reminded him of old battles, of nights spent in foxholes with only the distant echoes of war for company. Those nights had left scars invisible to the world, trust shattered, purpose evaporated, and hope buried under layers of guilt. He remembered the first time a comrade had died in his arms in Afghanistan, and how he had promised himself never to let anyone else slip through his fingers again. He remembered the second time and the third. By the time he came home, the promise had become a curse, a chain around his soul. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. And yet here in the flickering light of his cabin, he found himself trusting a dog, a living, breathing creature who had every reason to bite, flee, or hate him. Rex stirred, lifting his head and tilting it slightly. His eyes met Ethan. There was a silent question there, one that seemed almost human. Will you let me die here, or will you fight for me? Ethan closed his eyes and exhaled. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted softly. The words surprised him. He hadn't admitted uncertainty in years, not to anyone, not even himself. But with Rex there was no pretense, no armor, no expectation of toughness. There was only need, and need had a way of cutting through the hardest hearts. The wind outside rose again, rattling the walls, and Ethan felt the old, familiar panic claw at his chest. He realized then that he had been running from panic his whole life, both in war and at home. He had trained himself to survive explosions, to endure frostbite, to kill without flinching, but he had never learned to survive himself, not fully. Now, with the dog in his arms, he was forced to confront the raw, unfiltered reality of helplessness. If Rex didn't make it, there would be no victory, no sense of accomplishment. Just death, both theirs, and the cruel reminder that the world was indifferent to suffering. He wrapped the blanket tighter, pressing the dog to his chest. I know, he whispered. I know you're cold, I know it's hard, but we're going to make it, somehow. The words felt like a lie even as he said them. He didn't know if it was true. He only knew he had made a choice, and sometimes that alone was enough to keep someone moving forward. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional snap of the fire or Rex's soft whimpers. Ethan found himself thinking about the people he had lost, the friends he had buried in faraway deserts, the families he had left behind because he could not face them. War had taken his youth, his optimism, and the ability to trust. And yet, in the warmth of this cabin, he began to understand that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about caring, and choosing to fight even when the odds were stacked against you. He remembered a mission in Kandahar, when a young interpreter had frozen in fear under enemy fire. Ethan had shouted, begged, and finally dragged the man to safety, feeling the weight of responsibility in every fiber of his being. That man had survived, but the memory lingered as a reminder of the cost of choosing inaction. And now, staring down the German shepherd trembling at his feet, Ethan understood. Inaction was death. Action was hope. Outside, the snowstorm intensified. Ethan could see the outline of trees bending under the weight of ice, their branches snapping like brittle bones. The wind screamed past the cabin like a predator, and he realized that staying inside was not enough. He would have to venture out again soon, to find food, water, supplies. And he would have to do it with Rex at his side, his responsibility now a shared burden. The thought terrified him. He had spent years avoiding responsibility, building a fortress of isolation around his heart, and now it had collapsed in a single moment of need. Rex shifted, pressing his cold muzzle against Ethan's hand. The gesture was simple, almost mundane, yet it carried a weight that pressed into Ethan's chest. He realized he had been starving for connection, for purpose, for a reason to wake in the morning. The dog had offered him all three without even trying. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he said aloud. I don't even know if you'll survive the night. Rex tilted his head, eyes unblinking, as if answering in a way only a soldier could understand. We survived together or not at all. The hours dragged on. Ethan dozed fitfully, the cold seeping through the cabin despite the fire, dreams haunted by distant explosions and screams from a life that had felt permanent once. Each time he awoke, he found Rex awake too, eyes alert, listening, waiting. It was as if the dog carried a sixth sense for danger, a survival instinct that mirrored Ethan's own. By dawn, the snow had piled higher, drifting against the cabin walls. Ethan forced himself to stand, muscles stiff and aching from exhaustion. He moved to check the stove, to refill the water bowl for Rex, to prepare for the reality that outside was still a frozen battlefield. And yet, despite the frostbite threatening his fingers and the ache in his joints, he felt an unfamiliar determination. He looked down at Rex, lying curled on the blanket, and allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to break through the lines etched deep by years of hardship. "We'll figure it out," he said, voice rough but steady. "We always figure it out." The dog's ears twitched at the sound, tail giving a slight wag. Ethan knew deep down that this night had forged a bond stronger than anything he had known, stronger than fear, stronger than cold, stronger than years of loneliness. They were no longer just a man and a dog. They were partners in survival, soldiers in a new kind of war. But just as the fire flickered and warmth spread through the cabin, a sound outside made Ethan freeze, a crunch in the snow, deliberate and heavy, unlike the soft whispers of the storm. Rex's ears snapped forward, muscles tensing. The dog rose slowly, hackles up, staring toward the door. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Outside, in the middle of a -30°C storm, something, or someone, was moving toward the cabin. He crouched, hand on Rex's collar, mind racing. The snowstorm could hide anything. A neighbor checking on him, a wandering animal, or something far more dangerous. Every instinct honed in years of warfare flared up, the adrenaline rushing hot against the icy cold. Rex growled low and steady, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards themselves. Ethan met the dog's gaze, feeling a surge of connection, of unspoken agreement. Whatever was out there, they would face it together. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the cabin's fragile walls. Every shadow, every movement seemed magnified. Ethan gritted his teeth, knowing that the night was far from over and that survival meant not just warmth and shelter, but vigilance, courage, and a willingness to face the unknown. And somewhere in the dark, hidden by snow and ice, their next trial was already waiting. The storm outside had not relented. It pressed against the cabin walls with a force that seemed to echo the chaos Ethan carried inside him. Every gust rattled the windows, making them tremble as if the night itself wanted to invade. And yet, inside, warmth clung to the small room like a fragile promise. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, a cup of lukewarm coffee between his hands, watching Rex. The German shepherd's breathing had slowed, chest rising and falling like a pendulum, fragile yet persistent. Ethan's eyes traced the contours of the dog's battered body, noticing the deep gashes along his paws, the dull glint of frost in his fur, the sheer exhaustion etched in every line of his face. He shivered not entirely from the cold. He was haunted by the idea that Rex had survived alone in the brutal Montana winter for who knew how long. A week, 2, a month. His mind filled in the details too vividly, the empty roads, the frozen lakes, the predatory wildlife, and Ethan could feel the loneliness pressing into his chest. Rex stirred, raising his head. His ears twitched as if sensing something Ethan could not. He took a cautious step forward and nudged Ethan's hand with his nose. The gesture was simple, intimate, profound. "We trust each other now." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, we do," he whispered, but the moment of calm shattered the instant his eyes caught the dog's collar. The metal tag glinted under the firelight. He leaned closer, heart skipping. There, engraved in precise letters, was a name: Rex, service dog. Ethan's hand froze. Service dog. That single word hit him harder than any bullet ever had. A dog trained to serve, to protect, to save lives, and abandoned, or lost, or left for dead. The memories came rushing back like a floodgate opening. He remembered the men he had carried out of ambushes, the firefights where each second had meant life or death. He remembered working alongside service dogs in the field, watching them save soldiers from explosives, tracking enemies, detecting danger before humans could perceive it. And now, here was one, beaten and shivering, looking to him for help. His chest tightened. This was not just a dog. This was a soldier who had survived a war of a different kind, and it had been left alone. Ethan reached down slowly, touching the tag, tracing the letters with a trembling finger. Rex, he whispered. The name felt like a key, unlocking something he had locked away years ago, the part of him that still remembered honor, duty, and the promise to protect those who could not protect themselves. Rex shifted under his gaze, as if understanding that the man holding him now was more than a stranger. Ethan could see it in the dog's eyes, a mix of fear, fatigue, and a glimmer of hope. And that glimmer lit a spark inside Ethan that he had thought extinguished forever. But as the warmth of the cabin wrapped around them, the outside world reminded him of its cruelty. A sharp rapping at the door jolted him upright. Heart hammering, he moved cautiously, hand on the butt of the old hunting rifle he kept in the corner, not because he expected danger, but because instinct demanded vigilance. "Who's there?" Ethan's voice was low, steady, though his pulse raced. "Please," a voice answered, muffled by the storm. "Is there a German shepherd here?" Ethan froze. The tone was urgent, professional, not threatening, but the words made his stomach drop. Rex rose slowly, hackles raised, tail stiff. The dog's growl was low, steady, a warning. He pressed himself against Ethan, almost as if trying to shield him. "Rex," Ethan said softly, placing a calming hand on the dog's flank, but inside his mind was spinning. A service dog, there could be no mistake. Someone had to be looking for him, someone who thought Rex belonged elsewhere. The knocking continued, more insistent now, like a drumbeat signaling confrontation. Ethan glanced at Rex, whose eyes were fixed on the door. The dog had survived worse in the field, in deserts where humans died. But here, in a frozen town, the threat was unknown. Ethan's mind raced. Return the dog and risk sending him back to a life he might not survive. Keep him, and face consequences he didn't understand. Every instinct told him to protect Rex. Every memory reminded him of duty, of honor, of the lives lost in wars that never ended. He moved to the door, rifle raised. Through the small window he could see a man in a parka, face obscured by a scarf, boots sinking into snow already thick with accumulation. The figure hesitated, then spoke again. "I know he's here. He's mine. He's a service dog. You can't keep him." Ethan's pulse spiked. "He's not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not tonight." The man's voice tightened. "I'm serious. That dog is trained for work. He's valuable. You don't understand what you're dealing with." Ethan's fingers tightened on the rifle, but even as he braced for conflict, he saw Rex move. The dog stepped forward, body low, growling, not attacking, not reckless, but protective. Loyal, unflinching, watching Ethan for guidance. A wave of emotion hit him. Rage, fear, sorrow, and a surge of clarity. He would not let this dog be taken. Not by law, not by force, not by the world that had already abandoned both of them. The man outside cursed softly, shifting his weight. "You don't know what you're doing. There's paperwork, legal things. He's not yours to take." Ethan leaned slightly forward, his own voice quiet but deadly serious. "He's mine now, and I've seen what it means to be left behind. I won't let it happen again. Not him, not like the others." The man froze, then, as if calculating the risk, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said through the storm, "but tonight I'll leave you with him." The door slammed, rattling the cabin. The storm seemed louder, angrier, but inside the small fire flickered steady. Ethan exhaled, gripping Rex tightly. The dog pressed close, ears alert, but tail wagging slightly in cautious relief. Ethan sank to the floor again, heart pounding. He let the weight of the moment settle over him. The discovery of Rex's true identity, the confrontation, the danger that could still return. Every emotion collided inside him: fear, responsibility, anger, and most painfully, a surge of hope he hadn't felt in years. Rex nudged him again, soft, persistent. Ethan looked down, meeting those clear, determined eyes. "You're okay," he whispered. "We made it through the first test, but I have a feeling there's more coming." And he was right. Through the window, snow danced like shards of glass. Ethan realized that this storm was more than weather, it was a harbinger. If the world outside was relentless as it had always been, they would have to be stronger, smarter, and braver. Together. He traced Rex's ears with his fingers, taking in the scars, the frostbitten fur, the exhaustion that threatened to undo them both. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, he felt a connection deeper than memory, stronger than fear. "Service dog, huh?" Ethan muttered, almost laughing softly. "I guess we're both veterans now." Rex blinked, nuzzling against him, and Ethan let himself smile fully for the first time in years. Not because the storm had passed, not because the danger was gone, but because he had chosen to stand, to protect, to care. And that choice, he knew, would define everything to come. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, the bond between man and dog burned brighter than any fire, unbroken, unyielding. And somewhere in the howling darkness, Ethan knew that their story, their battle for survival, trust, and redemption, was just beginning. The storm outside showed no mercy. Snow whipped against the cabin windows like 1,000 invisible hands, rattling the fragile panes. Wind gusts howled in unison, as if the world itself were testing Ethan's resolve. Each sound was magnified in the small space, every creak of the wood and snap of the ice a reminder of the danger lurking beyond the cabin walls. Inside, warmth flickered from the old stove, but the fragile comfort was not enough to quiet Ethan's racing mind. Rex lay curled near the fire, chest rising and falling steadily, but alert. His ears twitched, tail giving a subtle warning when the wind rattled the door. Even after the confrontation with the stranger, Ethan knew the night was far from over. He stared at Rex, tracing the lines of the dog's fur with trembling fingers. Each scar, each frostbitten paw told a story of survival. The dog had endured hardship that most humans couldn't imagine, and now it was up to him to keep Rex alive. Not just for tonight, but for everything that might come. Ethan's gaze shifted to the door, still closed and locked. The thought of stepping back outside was terrifying. Every instinct screamed caution. The storm was brutal, the stranger could return, and the world beyond these walls was merciless. And yet, he knew that inaction was no longer an option. Rex stirred, lifting his head and giving a low, rumbling growl. Ethan's stomach dropped. The dog's ears were pinned back, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the door. Something or someone was out there. And this time there would be no warning, no second chance. Ethan reached for his coat and the hunting rifle in the corner, heart pounding. He had faced combat zones where bullets flew and men screamed, but nothing had prepared him for the vulnerability of defending a life inside a fragile cabin, with the cold and storm as his only allies. He motioned for Rex to stay low, pressing the dog's body against his side. The connection between them was palpable, a shared understanding that whatever was outside, they faced it together. A sudden thump at the door made Ethan flinch. His pulse accelerated as he moved cautiously toward the window. Snow swirled so violently he could barely see past the porch, but he noticed footprints, large, deliberate, crunching through the thickening snow. Someone was coming back. Ethan exhaled slowly, gripping the rifle tighter. "Stay close," he whispered to Rex. The dog pressed even closer, as if sensing the danger, tail tucked but growling softly. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a fragile trap. He debated his options. Opening the door could be fatal. Staying closed meant he might be trapped inside with no way to escape if the threat escalated. Every second stretched painfully, the storm outside masking the world in white, leaving only fear and uncertainty. Then came a knock, sharp, authoritative, impossible to ignore. It wasn't hesitant anymore. Whoever it was knew he was inside. Ethan froze. The rifle was ready. His mind raced through strategies, through memories of ambushes, of protecting comrades, of decisions made in split seconds. He had survived before, but this was different. This was personal. This was life or death for Rex. He leaned close to the window, trying to make out the figure. A man, parka pulled tight, scarf covering his face, stood there, motionless, watching. The stranger's eyes glinted in the dim light, calculating, assessing. "Ethan Cole," the man called out, voice muffled but clear. "I need the dog. Rex is trained for critical service. You can't keep him." Ethan's stomach sank. They had found him. He had hoped the storm and isolation would keep them away, at least for tonight. He glanced at Rex, who had risen to his feet, hackles raised, tail stiff. The dog's body language was defensive, protective, aware of the threat in a way that Ethan had never seen before. The weight of responsibility hit him like a freight train. Returning Rex would be a betrayal of trust, of everything the dog had endured. Keeping him meant risking confrontation. Either choice carried consequences, severe ones. Ethan stepped back from the window, rifle at the ready. He could hear the storm thrashing against the cabin like a predator testing its prey. His chest tightened, mind racing. He needed to make a choice. He could not hesitate. He moved toward the door, every step deliberate. "Rex stays," he said firmly, voice steady despite the fear coiling in his stomach. "He's not going anywhere." The man's eyes narrowed, scanning Ethan, scanning the cabin. "You don't understand," he said, voice sharp, almost desperate. "He's trained for life-saving work. You can't just—" "Stop," Ethan interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You left him out there. You abandoned him in the cold. He's alive because I chose to save him. I decide what happens now." Rex growled louder, body low to the ground, eyes fixed on the door. The dog was ready to defend Ethan, and Ethan felt a surge of pride, fear, and connection all at once. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It was steel. The stranger paused, visibly weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back, muttering, "This isn't over, but tonight he's yours." He turned, disappearing into the white storm like a shadow swallowed by snow. Ethan exhaled, slowly lowering the rifle. Rex nudged his hand, tail giving a tentative wag. For a moment there was relief, but it was fleeting. They were safe for now, but the world outside remained ruthless, and the threat would return. Ethan moved to the stove, stirring the fire, forcing warmth back into the cabin. He poured a small bowl of water for Rex and placed it near him, watching as the dog lapped it eagerly. The simple act of feeding him reminded Ethan of the weight of responsibility. He had chosen to protect this life, and there would be no turning back. Hours passed, the storm relentless. Ethan sat close to Rex, rubbing the dog's paws and watching the fire dance. The silence was heavy, filled with tension. Every crack of the wood, every howl of the wind reminded him that danger was still out there, waiting. Ethan's thoughts drifted to his own past, the men he had lost, the missions that went wrong, the guilt that had haunted him. He realized that protecting Rex was also a way of reclaiming some small part of himself, some fragment of the honor and duty he had once believed in. The dog was not just a life to save. He was a second chance at redemption. Outside, the storm raged, masking the world in white. But inside, the cabin had become a sanctuary, a fragile, temporary haven where two survivors, man and dog, clung to warmth, hope, and trust. Ethan looked at Rex, who had settled near the fire, eyes half closed but alert. He felt a surge of determination. They had survived the first challenge, the confrontation at the door, but the night was far from over. Supplies were low, the storm showed no sign of stopping, and the world outside remained a frozen battlefield. He knew that come morning they would face more trials. Food, water, safety, it all had to be secured. And the stranger, there was no doubt he would return, but for now they had one chance to survive the night. Ethan pressed a hand to Rex's head, feeling the warmth, the life, the trust. "We'll make it," he whispered. "One night at a time, one step at a time." Rex nudged his hand in response, as if promising the same. The bond between them, forged in desperation and survival, was now unbreakable. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But as the fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls, Ethan felt it. A subtle shift in the wind, a sound faint but deliberate, almost human, almost familiar. The storm had not given up, and neither had the world outside. The night stretched on, long and merciless. Every moment was a test of courage, patience, and willpower. Ethan knew that the coming hours would determine whether they survived, or if the cold, the storm, and the ruthless world beyond would claim them both. He tightened his grip on the rifle, eyes scanning the window. Rex rose, muscles tense, ears pricked. Together they waited. One door separated them from danger, and Ethan knew that one decision, one choice, could change everything. And beyond that door, the storm continued to howl, hiding threats that were patient, calculating, and relentless. The cabin was quiet, but the quiet was deceptive. Outside, the storm raged with unrelenting fury, snow swirling in blinding sheets that turned the world into a whiteout nightmare. Inside, Ethan and Rex were the only living things awake. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the walls, but it could not keep the world outside from pressing in. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together plans, contingencies, escape routes, but there were none. The storm had buried the roads under feet of snow, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. There would be no help, no backup, no easy choices. Rex stirred beside him, rising to his feet. The dog's movements were deliberate, calculated. His ears were pricked, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the cabin door. Every instinct told Ethan the dog had sensed something dangerous moving beyond the walls. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had faced ambushes, IEDs, sniper fire. He had survived firefights in Afghanistan that had left men screaming and dying around him. But nothing had prepared him for this. The vulnerability of protecting life inside a fragile cabin, in a frozen storm, against an unknown threat. The sound came first as a faint shift, almost lost beneath the howl of the wind, a subtle crunch of snow on wood, measured, deliberate. Then came a second, heavier step. Someone was outside, trying to reach them. Ethan's fingers tightened on the rifle. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, that sharp focus that only life-or-death situations could bring. He whispered to Rex, "Stay close. Watch the door." The dog responded immediately, body lowering, growl rumbling deep in his chest, a warning that reverberated through the floorboards. The door rattled violently. Someone was attempting entry. Ethan froze, weighing options. He could confront the intruder head-on, or he could try to barricade the cabin further, buy time. But time was a dangerous commodity. The snowstorm masked everything, hiding movements, disguising intentions. The door burst open suddenly, and Ethan reacted instinctively. Rifle up, muscles coiled, eyes scanning for threat. A man staggered inside, parka torn, eyes wide in panic, but Ethan recognized him immediately. Not an enemy soldier, not a predator, just a human, desperate and exhausted. Rex lunged, teeth bared, but Ethan held him back. The dog's growl vibrated through the small cabin, low and warning, yet protective. Ethan could feel the heat of Rex's body against his side, the shared tension between man and animal. The man gasped, voice shaking, "Please, I need the dog." Ethan's heart pounded. This was the stranger from before, the one who had claimed Rex belonged elsewhere. But seeing the fear in his eyes, the way he trembled from the cold, Ethan realized this was no ordinary threat. The man's desperation was genuine, but so was his intention. "Not tonight," Ethan said firmly. "Rex isn't going anywhere, not with you, not now, not ever." The man hesitated, scanning the cabin, eyes darting to Rex. "You don't understand," he said, voice tight. "He's trained, he can save lives. People depend on him." Rex growled, moving slightly forward, warning, protective. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's head, calming him but reinforcing their shared stance. "I understand exactly what he can do," Ethan said, "but he's not yours. You left him out there. You abandoned him in the storm. I won't make that same mistake." The man's face twisted, caught between fear, anger, and frustration. He stepped forward, trying to assert authority. "This isn't your choice." Ethan's mind sharpened, survival instincts kicking in. He had faced ambushes where hesitation meant death. Now, hesitation could mean Rex's death, or worse, his own. He leveled the rifle, eyes locking on the man. "This is my choice, and if you want him, you'll have to take him from me." Rex bristled, hackles up, body taut. The dog's eyes were locked on the intruder, every muscle coiled like a spring. Ethan could feel the energy in the cabin shift. The storm outside was relentless, but inside, a new battle had begun, a test of loyalty, courage, and will. The man froze, realizing that aggression would provoke a fierce response. He took a step back, voice lowering. I'm just trying to do my job," he said, trembling. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your job? His life is not your job. His life is here with me." The tension stretched on, a taut line ready to snap. Every sound, the fire crackling, the wind howling, the subtle shift of Rex's paws, was amplified, magnified as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. Then the man's stance shifted, subtle but telling. He wasn't advancing anymore. He wasn't threatening, not yet. He was calculating, trying to assess the impossible. A veteran who had survived war, paired with a German shepherd who had survived worse. Ethan didn't wait. He took the advantage, moving closer to Rex, pressing the dog's body against his side. "We survive together, or not at all," he whispered. Rex responded immediately, tail stiff, eyes blazing. He growled low and steady, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and the walls of the cabin. The dog was ready, but he was loyal. He would fight, but only for Ethan. The stranger exhaled sharply, realizing he could not force this. He muttered, "This isn't over. I'll be back," and retreated into the storm, boots crunching through the snow, disappearing into the white chaos. Ethan exhaled, lowering the rifle. Rex pressed against him, ears twitching, body tense but calm now. The battle was won for the moment, but Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside his mind. Every instinct screamed that the world would not give them peace so easily. He sank to the floor beside the fire, pulling Rex close. The dog rested his head against Ethan's chest, eyes half closed but alert. In that moment, Ethan felt the fragile, fleeting warmth of survival. Not just life, but the will to fight together against whatever came next. Hours passed in a tense rhythm. The storm outside howled, rattling the cabin, but inside, man and dog remained vigilant. Ethan checked the rifle repeatedly, listened for sounds through the thin walls, eyes scanning shadows cast by the firelight. Rex mirrored him perfectly, a silent sentinel. As the night dragged on, Ethan's thoughts wandered to the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the guilt that had followed him home. He realized that protecting Rex was also a way of redeeming himself, of reclaiming some fragment of honor, courage, and duty that had been buried under years of isolation and despair. Rex stirred, shifting slightly, tail brushing Ethan's hand. The gesture was small but full of meaning. They were not just surviving, they were learning to trust, to rely on each other, to be more than just solitary survivors in a frozen, hostile world. Ethan's eyes scanned the window again. The storm masked everything, hiding threats, masking opportunities. But he knew the truth. Outside, danger waited, patient, calculating. Inside, strength waited, loyalty, courage, and the bond forged in desperation. He leaned back against the wall, holding Rex close, and whispered into the dog's fur. "We made it through the first battle, but I know there's more coming, and we'll face it together." Rex shifted slightly, nuzzling against him, a quiet affirmation that whatever came next, they would be ready. Outside, the storm continued to rage. The world beyond the cabin walls was relentless, cold, and unforgiving. But inside, two survivors had found warmth, trust, and purpose. Together, they had won the first battle, but Ethan knew the war for survival was far from over. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls, and Ethan realized that every choice from this point forward would define them. Every step outside, every moment of vigilance, every heartbeat would matter, and he would not fail. Not Rex, not himself, not again. The storm howled, the wind shrieked, and the cabin trembled under the weight of the night. But inside, Ethan and Rex stood ready. They were two soldiers in a war of their own making, bound by trust, survival, and the unbreakable bond that had formed in the cold, unforgiving Montana wilderness. And somewhere in the shadows, beyond the storm, the next challenge awaited. The storm finally began to ease, though the world outside was still a white, howling expanse. Snow drifted in deep mounds, bending tree branches like frozen fingers, and the ice-crusted roadways were impassable for miles. But even with the storm receding, Ethan couldn't relax. His instincts were honed for danger, and every shadow in the cabin seemed to carry a threat. Rex lay curled near the fire, finally allowing himself to breathe more easily, but his ears remained perked. Ethan could feel the dog's tension, a silent reminder that the world didn't stop threatening just because the weather eased. The last night had been a test, and they had survived. But survival, Ethan knew, was rarely permanent. A sudden sound outside made both of them freeze. A soft crunch of snow, deliberate and measured, far closer than before. Ethan's hands went to the rifle, his body tightening as Rex rose, hackles up, tail stiff. Ethan crept to the small window, pressing his eye to the frosted glass. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out a figure approaching the cabin. Not running, not panicked, walking slowly, purposefully. Every step disturbed the snow, leaving deep prints, each one a warning. Ethan's mind raced. The storm had been relentless, few could have ventured out. And yet this man was here. Someone familiar, someone dangerous. The figure stopped at the edge of the porch, reaching up to knock on the door. The sound echoed sharply in the small cabin, vibrating against Ethan's chest. He froze, gripping the rifle. Then the man spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried an edge that cut through the cabin like a blade. "Ethan Cole, we need to talk." Ethan's heart sank. The name, the way it was said, brought memories he had long tried to bury. This was not just any visitor. This was someone tied to his past, someone who knew him. He swallowed hard, glancing at Rex. The dog's ears twitched, sensing the tension, sensing the danger. But there was no aggression yet, only awareness. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. "Who are you?" he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why are you here?" The man raised his hand slightly in a gesture of peace, but his eyes never wavered. "My name is Mason. I worked with you in Kandahar years ago, and I'm here because of Rex." Ethan froze, memories crashing in unbidden. Mason, the interpreter, the man who had survived ambushes beside him, who had trusted Ethan with his life. The same man Ethan had thought he'd lost, or perhaps abandoned, when the chaos of war consumed them both. "What about Rex?" Ethan asked cautiously, lowering the rifle slightly but keeping his hand ready. Mason's eyes softened for a brief moment, then hardened. "Rex, he's trained for critical missions. He's not just a dog, he's a service animal for operations that save lives. I've been looking for him, and I've finally tracked him here." Ethan's chest tightened. He had known Rex was valuable, but hearing it confirmed brought a complicated mix of pride and fear. "He's been through enough," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "He was out there alone in the storm. I saved him. He stays with me. That's my choice." Mason's jaw clenched. "I understand why you did what you did. I'd have done the same, but there are rules. He's assigned. He can't." Ethan cut him off. "He's more than a tool. He's alive because I made a choice to keep him alive, and if you try to take him from me now, you'll regret it." Rex growled softly, low and threatening, the sound vibrating through Ethan's boots. The dog moved closer, placing himself between Ethan and Mason. The message was clear: attack him and you'll face both of us. Mason froze, evaluating the scene. He wasn't here to fight, at least not physically. He was here to retrieve Rex, yes, but he had underestimated the bond forged in the cabin, the loyalty that had grown between man and dog in the storm. Ethan felt the surge of adrenaline, the same sharp edge he had felt in combat zones, the clarity that came only when life depended on it. His eyes locked on Mason's, and he realized that words alone would decide this confrontation. "Ethan," Mason said finally, voice steady but urgent, "I'm not here to fight, but Rex has a duty. He's trained for missions that save people. He can't just be kept. I need to bring him back to operations." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Back then in Kandahar we had rules, orders, missions, and lives were lost because we followed them blindly. Rex doesn't need another order. He needs someone who chooses him every day. That's me." The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of past decisions pressing down. Ethan felt the memories of every mission, every man lost, every choice that had haunted him. He realized that this confrontation was not just about the dog. It was about reclaiming control over the life he had thought broken, about defining his own sense of honor now that war was over. Mason's eyes softened slightly. He understood the depth of what Ethan was saying. "I get it," he admitted. "I can see that you saved him, and I can see that he's chosen you, but you need to understand his training is specialized. He could be needed for operations where people's lives depend on him. If something happens to him, lives could be lost." Ethan clenched his fists, body tense, mind racing. "I'm not letting him go," he said firmly. "Not tonight, not ever. And if you value his life, you'll leave, go back. Wait until I say he's ready, because until then, he's mine." Rex shifted, pressing against Ethan, ears alert, tail stiff. He was ready to defend, but he also trusted Ethan's judgment completely. They were a team now, forged in the cold, in danger, in trust. Mason's eyes flicked to the dog, reading the bond, the loyalty, the sheer defiance of survival against impossible odds. He sighed, a mixture of resignation and understanding. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can see that. He belongs with you for now. But Ethan, don't think this is over. I'll be back. There are rules we have to follow, and Rex is too valuable to ignore." Ethan nodded, tension still high but a measure of relief settling in. "Then you wait. He stays here with me, and if you come back, we'll see who's left standing." Mason gave a small, tight nod, then turned and disappeared into the snow, leaving only the crunch of retreating boots. The storm had eased, but the weight of the night of the confrontation lingered. Ethan lowered the rifle, heart still pounding, and exhaled slowly. Rex pressed his head against Ethan's chest, sensing the release of tension. Ethan stroked the dog's fur, feeling the warmth and life, the trust and loyalty that had carried them both through the night. He realized more clearly than ever that this was only the beginning. Outside, the world was still harsh and unyielding, but inside the cabin, life persisted. Two survivors, man and dog, had faced the first real test of trust, courage, and loyalty, and they had won. But Ethan knew the truth. The past had come knocking, and it had left a warning. The next challenge would not wait for storms to pass, nor for comfort to settle. The world outside was relentless, and it would demand everything from him. He looked down at Rex, whose eyes reflected the firelight, fierce, loyal, unbroken. "We survived the storm," he whispered, "but the real fight, it's just beginning." And somewhere beyond the snow-drifted trees, beyond the fatting storm, the shadows of the past waited patiently. They had come for Rex once, and they would come again. Inside, Ethan and Rex sat together, a fragile bubble of warmth and trust, but both knew survival would not be given. It had to be fought for again and again, and they were ready. The night stretched on, long and tense. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside reminded them that their battle had only just begun. And Ethan understood, finally, what he had been missing all these years: loyalty, trust, and the courage to fight, not for orders, not for rules, but for life itself. The storm was receding, but the war was not over. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside coated in a blinding white silence. Snow lay in deep drifts, bending tree limbs under its weight, and every sound carried unnaturally across the frozen landscape. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled weakly, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls, painting the room in strokes of orange and black. Ethan sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on Rex. The dog rested near the fire, ears twitching occasionally, alert to every noise. For a few hours they had a fragile peace, but Ethan knew that peace was temporary. Mason's warning had been clear. The past was patient. It would return, and when it did, it would bring consequences. Ethan's mind replayed every detail of the confrontation. Mason's voice, the weight of the words, the unspoken tension in his stance, all reminded Ethan that this wasn't just about a dog. It was about responsibility, trust, and choices he had long avoided. He had spent years surviving by withdrawing, by making himself untouchable. Now, he had something to fight for, and the stakes were higher than he had ever known. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Memories flooded in. The heat of the desert sun in Kandahar, the sharp crack of gunfire, the weight of men he had carried to safety, the bodies he could not save. He had survived wars, but the war inside him had never ended. And now, here in a cabin in the frozen Montana wilderness, he faced another battle, not against enemies with guns, but against time, weather, and the obligations of loyalty. Rex nudged his hand, warm and insistent. Ethan opened his eyes and looked down at the dog. The scars, the frostbitten paws, the deep trust in his eyes, all reminded Ethan of the bond they had forged in the storm. This was more than a dog. This was a comrade, a survivor, a partner in a war that had nothing to do with bullets but everything to do with courage. And then the thought hit him like a hammer. The world outside would come for Rex again. Mason had said so, and Ethan had no reason to doubt him. The dog's training made him valuable, too valuable to remain hidden for long. Every hour they stayed in the cabin was a reprieve, not a solution. Ethan stood, packing the small room, his boots crunching softly against the wooden floor. He had choices: keep hiding, risking exposure and eventual confrontation, or act. Take the dog, find a safe place, ensure he could survive, and perhaps even thrive, without waiting for the world to come knocking. Rex followed his every movement, eyes alert, tail low but wagging slightly. The dog sensed the tension, the decision forming in Ethan's mind. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about honor, protecting something that had earned the right to live, even if it meant breaking rules, defying orders, and risking consequences. Ethan made his decision. He would act, and he would do it tonight. He gathered supplies: canned food, bottled water, blankets, and the rifle. He checked the door and windows, making sure they were secure. Then he knelt beside Rex, gently brushing the dog's fur and whispering reassurance. "We're moving," he said softly. "We'll find a place they can't reach. We'll survive together." Rex's ears pricked, tail wagging faintly. He understood. He had always understood. As they stepped outside, the world was a frozen wasteland. The storm had left a deceptive calm, the snow soft underfoot but deep enough to slow progress. Ethan moved deliberately, scanning for movement, tracking every sound with military precision. The cabin faded behind them, a temporary refuge abandoned for survival. Hours passed as they trudged through the snow, muscles burning, lungs screaming against the cold. The sky was a steel gray, the sun a pale, distant glow barely breaking the horizon. Each step was a test of endurance, each breath a reminder that they were alive and vulnerable. Ethan's mind replayed Mason's warning. Rex's training made him invaluable. People depended on him. There were forces that would come for him, and they would not hesitate to use violence. Ethan knew they would not stop at persuasion. They would use every resource, every tool, every tactic to retrieve the dog. He stopped for a moment, catching his breath, and looked down at Rex. The dog was alert, eyes scanning the horizon, tail low but wagging slightly in reassurance. Ethan's chest tightened. He had made a promise to protect this life, and promises in his world were absolute. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. A figure in the distance, cloaked in white, almost invisible against the snow. Ethan froze, heart hammering. The figure was moving with purpose, boots leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. Someone was following them. He crouched, signaling Rex to stay close. The dog responded instantly, body low, muscles coiled. Ethan's fingers tightened on the rifle. The pursuit was deliberate, calculated. Whoever was coming was patient, waiting for the right moment. As they moved through the snow, Ethan's mind raced. Every step had to be precise. Every choice could mean life or death. The past had caught up to them, and now the future depended on a single, unwavering decision: protect Rex, no matter the cost. The figure in the distance broke into a jog, then stopped suddenly, watching. Ethan realized they were being assessed, evaluated. The stranger wasn't just coming after the dog, they were testing him, measuring his resolve, waiting to see if he would falter. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't flinch. He had survived ambushes, IEDs, firefights where men died around him. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and death. And now, in this frozen wilderness, he was facing something just as dangerous: the responsibility of protecting a life that depended entirely on him. He signaled Rex to move, and they began a deliberate detour through the trees, deeper into the forest. Snow crunched underfoot, and every sound was amplified in the silence of the frozen world. Ethan's mind raced, calculating distances, estimating time, predicting movement. The figure followed, cautious but relentless. Ethan's pulse quickened. He realized that the confrontation could happen at any moment, and they would have no cover, no reinforcements, no escape. Every instinct screamed caution, but retreat was not an option. Hours blurred into one another as they pressed deeper into the wilderness. Finally, they reached a secluded ridge overlooking a frozen river. The wind howled, carrying snow in blinding gusts, but here, the world seemed quieter, almost sacred. Ethan paused, letting Rex settle beside him. He looked out over the icy expanse, chest heaving, mind sharpening. He had choices now: continue hiding and risk pursuit, or make a stand, ensure that Rex survived, no matter the cost. Ethan realized that the decision was simple. Rex's life, his loyalty, his trust, they demanded action, not hiding, not fear, action. He tightened his grip on the rifle, placing a hand on the dog's flank. "We're going to make a stand," he whispered, "together, no matter what comes." Rex pressed close, body low, eyes alert. Ethan felt the bond between them, forged in storms, battles, and shared survival, solidify into something unbreakable. And then in the distance he saw movement again, shadows among the trees, deliberate, silent, approaching. Ethan raised the rifle, heart hammering. The confrontation was coming, and this time there would be no hesitation, no second chance. They had survived the storm, survived the past knocking at the door, survived the cold and isolation. But the real battle was about to begin. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the snow bite at his cheeks, the wind whip against his coat. He looked down at Rex. "This is it," he said. "Whatever comes, we survive, together. No one gets him, not now, not ever." Rex growled softly, tail stiff, body coiled like a spring. They were ready. The ridge fell silent, the wind carrying only the faintest whisper of movement. And in that moment, Ethan understood fully what it meant to fight not for orders, not for duty, not for rules, but for honor, loyalty, and life itself. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And the world outside, relentless and unforgiving, was already closing in. The wind had sharpened into a howl, carrying ice across the frozen river like shards of glass. Ethan crouched low behind a fallen log, his rifle resting steady across his knees. Beside him, Rex mirrored his stance, muscles coiled, ears pricked, eyes scanning the tree line for movement. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the crunch of snow underfoot, set them on edge. Hours of careful maneuvering had brought them here, to the edge of the frozen expanse. Ethan's plan was simple: make a stand, protect Rex, and survive long enough for help, or at least for the world to stop pressing against them. But simplicity was a lie. The storm had left the landscape deceptive, every snowdrift a potential trap, every shadow a hiding place for a pursuer. He pressed a hand to Rex's flank. "Stay sharp," he whispered. The dog's tail twitched slightly in acknowledgement. Their bond had been forged in the storm, tempered by fear and trust, and now it was steel, unbreakable, precise, alive. The first shadow emerged from the tree line, deliberate, slow, measuring. Ethan tensed, rifle aimed, every muscle primed. Rex growled low, a warning rumble that vibrated against the frozen ground. Ethan recognized the gate immediately. The stranger from the cabin, Mason, approaching with careful steps, flanked by two others. Mason's voice cut through the wind. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. Give me Rex and no one gets hurt." Ethan shook his head, eyes never leaving the approaching group. "He's not yours," he shouted, voice sharp and unwavering. "He's mine, and you're not taking him." The wind whipped snow into Ethan's face, stinging, blinding, but he could see the determination in Mason's eyes. They were trained, skilled, and methodical, but Ethan had something they underestimated: loyalty born from trust, not orders. The first figure lunged forward through the snow. Ethan fired a warning shot, snow exploding around the man's feet. Rex barked sharply, lunging to the side, teeth bared. The intruders froze, clearly startled by the dog's ferocity and precision. Ethan didn't wait. He shifted behind the log, careful, calculated, keeping Rex between him and the attackers. Every breath was shallow, every heartbeat sharp. He could feel the adrenaline coursing, sharpening his senses to the world around him. The second attacker moved closer, rifle raised, but before he could aim properly, Rex sprang, leaping onto the man's shoulders with a speed and precision that took Ethan's breath away. The dog's jaws clamped firmly, controlled, non-lethal but terrifying. The man stumbled, snow spraying, and Ethan fired another warning shot. The first intruder backed away cautiously, eyes wide with fear. Mason raised his hands again, but his gaze flicked to Rex, understanding the bond. "Ethan, he's trained. He's not just a pet, you can't." "I know what he is," Ethan interrupted, voice cold. "But he's alive because I chose him, and I'm not letting anyone take that away." The attackers hesitated, assessing the situation. They had underestimated the veteran's resolve and the dog's instincts. Every step forward was a risk, every decision measured against the lethal combination of man and dog. Ethan felt the storm's chill biting through his jacket, but his focus was razor-sharp. He had faced death countless times in foreign deserts and war zones, but this was different. This was personal. This was trust in its purest, rawest form. Rex barked sharply again, signaling readiness. Ethan could see Mason's hesitation, the weight of responsibility pressing on the man. But the others were impatient, desperate, and untrained in handling a dog like Rex. One wrong move, and disaster would strike. Ethan shifted his stance, firing another warning shot that landed inches from the first intruder's feet. Snow sprayed in clouds. Rex lunged again, forcing them to scatter, moving with precision, never letting the attackers gain ground. Mason shouted something, clearly issuing orders, but his voice was lost in the wind. The intruders hesitated, caught between fear of the dog and their orders. Ethan realized they weren't just trying to take Rex, they were testing him, seeing if he would falter. He would not falter. Ethan adjusted his aim, waiting for the perfect moment. When the third intruder lunged forward recklessly, he fired, not to kill but to intimidate. The bullet struck the ice nearby, sending shards flying, snow exploding in a white plume. The figure fell back, startled, allowing Ethan and Rex to advance strategically. The battle became a dance of precision, instinct, and trust. Every move Ethan made was mirrored by Rex, every command understood without a word spoken. They were a single unit now, forged by desperation and survival. Mason watched, torn between duty and understanding, as Ethan held his ground. "Ethan, stop this," he called. "You're making this worse. He could be lost forever if you continue." Ethan shook his head, determination etched into every line of his face. "He's not lost, not on my watch, not ever." The attackers retreated, recognizing that the veteran and his dog were not to be underestimated. Mason hesitated, caught between orders and the undeniable bond he saw between man and dog. Finally, he backed down, hands raised, a grudging respect in his eyes. Ethan lowered the rifle slightly, heart pounding, adrenaline still coursing. He looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail slightly, ears still alert, ready for any movement. The storm had passed, the attackers had retreated, and for the first time in hours, Ethan allowed himself a breath. But relief was fleeting. Ethan knew that the world outside the frozen wilderness was relentless. Mason and his team might return, better prepared, more determined. But Ethan had proven one thing tonight. Choices forged in loyalty and courage could defy orders, rules, and even fear itself. He knelt, brushing his hand along Rex's fur, feeling the warmth and life of the dog who had survived storms, abandonment, and fear, and who now survived with him. "We did it," he whispered. "Together." Rex nudged his hand, eyes blazing with trust and understanding. Ethan realized that survival was not just about enduring the cold or fighting intruders. It was about protecting what mattered, standing firm even when the odds seemed impossible, and honoring the bonds that gave life meaning. The storm faded entirely, leaving a cold, silent dawn over the frozen landscape. The first rays of sun reflected off the snow, painting the world in a blinding, pristine white. Ethan and Rex stood side by side, a pair forged in survival, loyalty, and unbreakable trust. Ethan looked out across the icy expanse, knowing that the past would always knock again. Mason and others might return. Rules and orders might try to claim Rex. But tonight they had won. Tonight they had made a stand, and the bond between man and dog had redefined honor itself. He patted Rex's head, feeling the beat of the dog's heart against his chest. "We survived the storm," he said, "and we survived each other. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Rex barked softly, tail wagging slightly, a simple affirmation of trust, loyalty, and love. Ethan felt a weight lift, the years of isolation and guilt beginning to ease. He had fought wars in distant lands, faced death countless times, and lost comrades he could never forget. But here, in this frozen wilderness, he had found something worth fighting for, a life, a bond, a chance at redemption. The wind carried only the whisper of the past now, but Ethan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Rex were ready. Not because the world was fair, not because danger would stop, but because they had chosen each other, and that choice was more powerful than any law, any order, or any storm. He knelt again, wrapping an arm around Rex. "We made it through everything," he whispered, "and we'll make it through whatever comes next." The dog nuzzled his hand in agreement, and for the first time in years, Ethan smiled fully, not for survival, not for duty, but for trust, loyalty, and the unwavering bond that had carried them through the storm. Above the frozen river, the sun rose slowly, a pale glow reflecting off the snow, signaling a new day. A day where man and dog had faced the storm and the past and survived, together. And somewhere in the distance, the world waited, patient and relentless. But Ethan and Rex were ready. One last stand had been made, and the bond forged in fire and frost was unbreakable. They had survived. And they would survive again.